My brother's teacher has a 100% test pass rate and a body count of 5 students. I'm the sixth shadow. Chapter 1. The Sixth Shadow. The hospital air in the ICU always smells the same, a sterile cocktail of ozone, industrial-grade floor wax, and the metallic tang of unspoken fear. I sat in a plastic chair that had been designed by someone who clearly hated human comfort, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of my 17-year-old brother's chest. Leo was a straight-A student. He was the kind of kid who did his homework on Friday nights so he could have his weekends free for productive leisure. He was also currently intubated because he had decided that a bottle of high-strength beta-blockers was a better alternative than attending his third-period advanced placement biology class. My name is Elias Thorne. By trade, I am a data analyst and a senior regulatory auditor. I spend 40 hours a week finding the ghosts in corporate ledgers, the tiny discrepancies that indicate a billion-dollar company is slowly bleeding itself dry through internal rot. I don't get angry. I find the variable that doesn't fit the equation and I remove it. I found Leo's survival journal under his mattress while the paramedics were still loading him into the rig. It wasn't a diary. It was a log. Entry 42, Tuesday, 11:14 a.m. Sterling called on me. She didn't ask a question. She just stared until the silence reached 30 seconds. Then she said, "Natural selection is a mercy, Leo. It keeps the herd from suffering the weight of the weak. Why are you weighing us down?" The class laughed. My heart rate was 145 BPM. I turned the pages. It wasn't just Leo. The journal was filled with names. Some were crossed out. Next to the name Sarah Miller, 2018, Leo had written a single word, quiet. Next to David Chen, 2020, he had written, gone. I recognized the name Victoria Sterling. She was the crown jewel of Westwood High. Her students didn't just pass the AP exams, they obliterated them. She had a wall of trophies and a tenure that made her effectively a sovereign state within the school district. But as I read through Leo's meticulous notes, logs of every insult, every psychological stress test, every moment she isolated a student from their peers, I realized she wasn't a teacher. She was a systems-level predator. Most people, upon reading that their brother had been bullied into a suicide attempt, would go to the school and scream. They would make a scene. They would let their EQ display spike to 100%, and in doing so, they would give the antagonist exactly what they wanted, a reason to call security and paint the family as unstable. I didn't scream. I pulled out my laptop and opened a fresh encrypted volume. I started with the school's public-facing data. Westwood High's Excellence in Science grant was worth $250,000 annually. It was predicated on a specific metric, consistent high-tier performance and zero attrition in advanced tracks. I cross-referenced the enrollment numbers. In the last 10 years, Sterling's classes started with 30 students in September. They always ended with exactly 22 in May. Every single year, 8 students dropped the class. In the education world, this is called counseling out. In my world, this is called data manipulation. I looked at the names of the counseled-out students. 5 of them were dead, not from accidents, from sudden mental health crises. The Sterling 5. The school board saw her as a profit center. The parents saw her as a gateway to the Ivy League. I saw her as a faulty algorithm that was currently killing my brother. I closed the laptop and looked at Leo. His hand was cold. I didn't pray. I didn't cry. I made a contemporaneous record of his vitals and the time. War isn't a feeling. War is a series of binding mechanisms. And Victoria Sterling had just handed me the first link in her own chain. Chapter 2. The Level 1 Warning. 48 hours after Leo was stabilized, I requested a parent-teacher conference. I didn't go as a grieving brother. I went as his legal guardian, wearing a charcoal suit and carrying a leather-bound folio that contained nothing but blank paper and a concealed high-fidelity digital recorder. Victoria Sterling's classroom was an exercise in psychological dominance. The desks were arranged in a V shape, all pointing toward her podium. The walls were covered in posters of Darwin, Mendel, and Crick. On her desk sat a brass scale. On one side was a stack of textbooks, on the other, a single, withered leaf. She didn't stand when I entered. She was grading papers with a fountain pen, the red ink looking like fresh incisions on the white pages.
"Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice a polished mahogany. "I was sorry to hear about Leo's episode. He was always such a fragile boy. It's a shame when the mind cannot keep pace with the curriculum."
I sat down. I didn't cross my legs. I didn't fidget. I practiced the gray rock method. I became as interesting as a pebble. "I'm here to discuss his academic standing," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of the tremor she was clearly fishing for.
"Leo's standing is non-existent." Sterling smiled. It was the smile of a cat that had found a mouse with a broken leg. "My syllabus is clear. More than 3 consecutive absences results in an automatic withdrawal. I cannot have the class average dragged down by empty chairs."
The absences are medical, I noted. Under the district's Regulation 742, medical emergencies constitute an excused hiatus with a mandatory 3-week grace period for makeup work.
Regulation 742 applies to the general student body. Sterling's pen paused. She looked up, her eyes sharp. "This is an AP excellence track, Mr. Thorne. We operate under a different social contract here. We are preparing these children for the reality of the world. The world does not give grace periods for weakness." She leaned forward, her hubris beginning to leak through the professional veneer. "I have a 100% pass rate. Do you know why? Because I filter the sediment. I am the catalyst that ensures only the pure elements remain." Leo was sediment. He was unable to handle the pressure of the Darwinian environment I cultivate. His attempt on his own life is merely the ultimate form of dropping the class. It is, in its own tragic way, a form of academic honesty.
I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I just looked at the brass scales on her desk. "You believe your classroom is a closed ecosystem, Mrs. Sterling," I said quietly. "You believe that within these 4 walls, your Darwinian philosophy supersedes the state education code."
"I believe results speak for themselves," she snapped. "The board agrees with me. The parents of the 22 students who get into Harvard and Yale agree with me. You are a single, disgruntled relative of a boy who failed. You are statistically insignificant."
I stood up. I hadn't raised my voice once. Statistically insignificant is a dangerous assumption for an educator to make, I said. Data points are only insignificant until they form a trend. I'm giving you a level 1 warning, Mrs. Sterling.
"Re-enroll, my brother. Provide the makeup materials as required by law, or the ecosystem you've built is going to face an invasive species it isn't prepared for." She laughed. It was a cold, brittle sound. "Is that a threat, Mr. Thorne?"
"No," I said, checking my watch. "It's a record. Our meeting concluded at 4:12 p.m. Have a productive evening." As I walked out, I felt the weight of the recorder in my pocket. I had exactly what I needed. Chapter 3. The Board's Shield. The following Monday, I sat in the carpeted silence of Superintendent Miller's office. I had followed the chain of command to the letter. I had a typed summary of the meeting with Sterling, a copy of Regulation 742, and a medical affidavit from Leo's psychiatrist. Superintendent Miller was a man who looked like he was made entirely of beige linen and compromise. Beside him sat Brenda Vance, the president of the school board. She was a woman whose jewelry cost more than the annual salary of a starting teacher.
Mr. Thorne, Miller began, leaning back. We've reviewed your concerns. Victoria Sterling is one of our most decorated educators. Her results are, frankly, the pride of this district.
Her results are manufactured through the systematic psychological abuse of minors, I said. I have provided a recording, legally obtained in this one-party consent state, where she admits to filtering students with medical emergencies to protect her averages.
Brenda Vance didn't even look at the folder I'd placed on the table. She adjusted a pearl earring. Mr. Thorne, let's be adults. AP Biology is a high-stress environment. Some children are simply not built for it. It sounds to me like your brother had a pre-existing instability that he chose to manifest during a difficult course. To blame a teacher for a student's internal struggle is, well, it's a bit litigious, don't you think?
I'm not here to discuss his struggle, I said. I'm here to discuss the $250,000 state excellence grant. The grant that is contingent on a zero attrition policy for students who qualify for the program. If Mrs. Sterling is filtering students who have medical crises, she is faking the data that the state uses to award those funds. That isn't a struggle. That is fraud. The air in the room shifted. The word fraud is a high-velocity projectile in a government building.
Miller cleared his throat. That is a very serious accusation, one that we have investigated internally. Mrs. Sterling's records show that every student who left her class did so voluntarily. They signed withdrawal forms, including your brother.
My brother was in a drug-induced coma when that form was signed, I said, my voice dropping an octave. We have a digital signature from his student portal, Vance said, her voice turning icy. Dated Friday evening. Perhaps he did it before his incident.
They were lying. It was a clumsy, panicked lie, but they had the system on their side. They had the portal access, the tech department, and a vested interest in keeping the Sterling grant flowing. If Sterling fell, the excellence of the district fell with her. I see, I said. I stood up and straightened my tie. I didn't argue. I didn't point out the impossibility of the timeline.
We consider this matter closed, Mr. Thorne, Miller said, a note of triumph in his voice. We suggest you focus on your brother's recovery and perhaps find him a less challenging school for the next semester. We will, of course, fight any attempt to disparage Mrs. Sterling's reputation.
I looked at them both. This was the rotten root. The teacher was the symptom. The board was the infection. They were protecting her because she was their golden goose. I understand perfectly, I said.
You've chosen to prioritize the hubris of a single teacher over the V-material of 5 dead students and 1 survivor. You've just increased the scope of this audit from 1 classroom to the entire district office. Are you threatening the board, Mr. Thorne? Vance asked, her eyes narrowing.
No, I said. I'm just documenting the chain of liability. Since you've explicitly refused to follow the medical leave mandate, you've now made the board personally liable for any further escalation. I walked out of the office. I didn't go to my car. I went to the school library. Chapter 4. The Counselor's Grave. Sarah Jenkins lived in a small, cramped apartment 3 towns over. It smelled of peppermint tea and the kind of quiet anxiety that comes from having your career professionally dismantled. She had been the head counselor at Westwood High for 12 years. 3 years ago, she had been fired for performance issues and inappropriate boundary violations. When I showed her my credentials and Leo's journal, her hands began to shake.
"You're the first one to come asking," she whispered, her eyes darting to the door. "Most parents just take the settlement money and go away. The board is very good at facilitating silence."
I don't want a settlement, I said. I want the Sterling 5. I want the names, the dates, and the specific reasons you were fired. Sarah sat down at her kitchen table. She pulled out a dusty cardboard box from under the sink. This was her insurance policy.
I was fired because I refused to stop logging the anxiety clusters in Sterling's classroom, she said. In 2018, Sarah Miller didn't just withdraw. She begged me to help her get out of that class. She said Sterling had a blacklist on the whiteboard, the students who were slowing down the evolution of the class. I took a photo of the handwritten logs Sarah had kept. Sterling doesn't just bully, Sarah continued. She uses the other students. She creates a predator-prey dynamic. She rewards the alphas, the kids with the highest scores, by giving them power over the omegas. They peer review each other's work. If an omega fails, the alpha's grade is also penalized. It's a forced dependency loop. It turns the entire class into her personal mob. And the board knew, the board loved it, Sarah said bitterly. They called it collaborative accountability. They used Sterling's model as a template for the whole district, but Sarah Miller couldn't handle the accountability. She was the first one. She jumped from the water tower. I looked at the date. Sarah Miller, June 2018. Then there was David Chen, Sarah said. 2020. He was a brilliant kid, but he had a stutter. Sterling used to make him read the survival of the fittest chapters aloud for the entire hour. Every time he stumbled, she'd take a point off the class's efficiency score. By the end of the month, the other kids were leaving threatening notes in his locker. He took his father's hunting rifle to the park. Sarah Jenkins began to cry, not for herself, but for the weight of the data points she had been forced to witness. I tried to report the efficiency scores to the Department of Education, she said. The principal intercepted the mail. He told me that if I pushed it, they'd make sure I never worked in education again. Then they found a flask in my desk. I don't even drink.
I stood up and placed my hand on the box. Sarah, you've been holding on to this for 3 years. I'm a regulatory auditor. I deal in binding evidence. This box isn't just a memory. It's the V material of a systematic civil rights violation. What are you going to do? She asked. I'm going to establish a pattern of practice, I said. The board thinks these are 6 isolated incidents of fragile children. I'm going to show them it's a single, 10-year-long crime scene. I left Sarah's apartment with the box. My next step was the families. In the U.S., the Slayer rule and wrongful death statutes have long tails. But more importantly, I needed the parents to agree to a joint forensic audit of their children's student accounts. Chapter 5. Gathering the GHOSTS. The first family was the Millers. They lived in a house that felt like it had been frozen in 2018. There were photos of Sarah everywhere, a girl with bright eyes and a flute, her life captured in a series of school portraits that stopped abruptly at age 16.
Mr. Miller was a quiet man, a retired mechanic who spent his days staring at a garden that was too well kept. When I told him why I was there, he didn't get angry. He got tired. The school told us she was disturbed, he said, his voice cracking. They said the AP class was just the catalyst for something that was already broken in her. We believed them. We even signed a waiver saying we wouldn't sue in exchange for them covering the funeral costs. We thought they were being kind.
They weren't being kind, I said, placing Sarah Jenkins' logs on the table. They were buying your L-binding, your right to seek discovery. Look at this. I showed him the efficiency score logs from June 2018. On the day Sarah Miller died, her class efficiency had dropped to 60% because of her poor performance on a practice exam. Mrs. Sterling had posted the scores on the digital bulletin board, highlighting Sarah's name in red.
Mr. Miller's hands began to shake as he read the notes Sarah had written to herself. The alphas said they'll lose their college credit because of me. Sterling told them I'm the weak link in the chain. I can't be the reason they fail.
This is pattern of practice, I explained. I've contacted 3 other families, the Chens, the Gomeses, and the Wrights. All of them have the same story. All of them were told their children were isolated cases. None of them knew about the others. I spent the next 48 hours in a series of living rooms that felt like tombs. I was a salesman of cold reality. I didn't offer them comfort. I offered them systemic retribution. By Wednesday, I had 5 signed affidavits. And more importantly, 5 authorizations for Marcus Vane to subpoena the archived metadata of the school's student portal. The school board thought they were safe because they controlled the records. But in the digital age, control is an illusion. Every time a student withdrew, a log was created. Every time a signature was applied, an IP address and a device ID were recorded. I spent the night in my home office, running the initial data scrape on the public-facing logs I'd managed to bypass. I wasn't looking for the what, I was looking for the where. In my world, we call this the metadata fingerprint. If Leo's signature was forged on a Friday night while he was in the ICU, the IP address would likely trace back to the school district's central office. Or worse, Victoria Sterling's home. As the sun began to rise, the screen flickered. I had found the purge pattern. Every year, exactly 2 weeks before the State Excellence Grant student count was finalized, there was a spike in voluntary withdrawals in Sterling's class. It wasn't random. It was a clockwork cleanup. She was purging the bottom 20% of her class, the kids who might score a 3 instead of a 5 on the AP exam, to ensure her excellence metrics remained perfect. She was literally killing students to keep her stats high enough for a $250,000 grant. I felt a cold, sharp sensation in my chest. It wasn't anger. It was the feeling an auditor gets when they find the smoking gun in the middle of $1 million fraud. My phone buzzed. It was a text from the nurse at the hospital. Leo is awake. He's asking for his biology notebook. He's terrified he's missed the survival deadline. I looked at the data on my screen. The Sterling 5 weren't just victims of bullying. They were victims of an insurance and grant protection racket. The school board wasn't just protecting a teacher, they were protecting the revenue. I picked up the phone and called Marcus.
The ghosts are gathered, I said. I have the pattern of practice. And Marcus, I have the IP logs. The board didn't just forge the signatures. They did it from the principal's office computer. That's not a civil dispute anymore, Elias, Marcus said, his voice dropping.
That's a federal felony. If they used state-funded systems to forge documents to secure a federal grant, that's wire fraud. Exactly, I said. Mrs. Sterling wants to talk about survival of the fittest. I think it's time she learned about the survival of the audit. Chapter 6, The Paper Trail. In the world of regulatory auditing, we have a saying, follow the money and you'll find the motive. Follow the ego and you'll find the evidence. Victoria Sterling was a master of both, but even a master leaves a digital footprint when they get greedy. While Marcus Vane was busy wrangling the grieving parents into a cohesive legal front, I was digging into the financial front. I didn't believe for a second that Sterling's Darwinian classroom was purely ideological. Power is rarely its own reward in the suburbs. It's usually a down payment on a lifestyle. I started by looking into Sterling's extracurricular activities. On paper, she was a dedicated educator who spent her weekends mentoring. However, a deep search of the Secretary of State's business registry revealed a domestic LLC registered 18 months ago, VS Elite Academic Consulting. The business address was a P.O. box in a high-end zip code. The consulting services offered were vague: advanced placement trajectory optimization and collegiate portfolio management. The price tag, however, was not vague. It was $5,000 per semester. I cross-referenced the names of the alphas in Sterling's current class, the students who were never targeted, never counseled out, and who frequently served as her enforcers against the weak. Of the 22 students remaining in her class, 19 were active clients of VS Elite Academic Consulting. This wasn't just a conflict of interest. It was a protection racket. I sat in my home office, the blue light of the monitor reflecting off my glasses. I had 3 spreadsheets open. Spreadsheet A, the Sterling 5, the dead. Spreadsheet B, the counseled out, the survivors who fled. Spreadsheet C, the VS Elite clients. The correlation was 0.98. If you paid the $5,000 mentoring fee, you were an alpha. You were protected. You were given the efficiency score boosts. If you didn't pay, or if your family couldn't afford the entry fee, you were marked as sediment. You were the prey used to keep the alphas sharp and the class averages high. This was extortion masquerading as excellence. I reached out to a contact in a local forensic accounting firm, a woman named Elena who specialized in shadow billing. I handed over the LLC name and the list of parents.
I need to know if any of this money is touching the school's academic decathlon fund, I told her. Sterling is the faculty advisor for that fund.
If she's commingling her private consulting fees with school-sanctioned activity funds, she's moved from a civil violation to embezzlement.
Give me 48 hours, Alina said. Private LLCs are opaque, but the parents' bank records during a discovery phase are transparent. If they're writing checks to her LLC and she's donating portions back to the school to hit grant milestones, she's created a circular fraud loop.
I spent the rest of the night documenting the gatekeeper effect. Sterling was using her position as a state-funded teacher to funnel students into her private business. In the U.S., this violates the Ethics in Government Act and the Model Code of Ethics for Educators. But more importantly, it gave me a lever. The school board might protect a star teacher for her test scores, but they cannot protect a teacher who is running a private tax-sheltered racket using school resources. That would trigger a joint and several liability that could bankrupt the district. I felt the gray rock within me settling. I wasn't just a brother anymore. I was a liquidator. Chapter 7. Front 1 Attack. The first strike in a cold justice campaign must be systemic, not personal. You don't aim for the person, you aim for the foundation they stand on. For Victoria Sterling, that foundation was the $250,000 state excellence grant. On Thursday morning, I didn't call the school. I didn't email the principal. I bypassed the local hierarchy entirely and filed a formal whistleblower complaint with the State Department of Education's Office of Inspector General, OIG. The complaint was 34 pages long. It didn't mention bullying once. It didn't mention my brother's suicide attempt. Those were emotional variables that the OIG would dismiss as internal school matters. Instead, the complaint focused on grant fraud. I provided the purge pattern data, the statistical proof that Sterling's class attrition was timed perfectly to ensure the student count, for the grant was always optimized with high performers. I included the Sarah Jenkins logs showing that the withdrawals were not voluntary but coerced under threat of academic blacklisting. By the time I hit submit, I had activated the arm of the government. 2 hours later, the OIG issued a notice of preliminary inquiry to the Westwood School District. This is the regulatory equivalent of a shark fin appearing in a swimming pool. The OIG doesn't discuss things. They freeze the funds. I was in the hospital room with Leo when my phone rang. It was an unknown number with a local area code. I knew it was the school. I let it go to voicemail. Gray Rock rule: never answer a panicked predator. Let them sit in the silence of the unknown. 5 minutes later, it rang again. Then a text arrived from Superintendent Miller's secretary. Mr. Thorne, there is an urgent matter regarding the district's standing. Please come to the office immediately. I didn't go. Instead, I sent a one-sentence email. All communication regarding my brother or my observations of district conduct must now be directed to my legal counsel, Marcus Vane. I am currently occupied with my brother's recovery. The consequence was immediate. By 3:00 p.m., a safety alert was sent out to all Westwood High staff. I was officially persona non grata. My access to the student portal, which I still held through Leo's credentials, was revoked, but it was too late. I had already mirrored the entire server's log for Sterling's specific classroom folder.
Marcus called me 10 minutes later. The board is losing their minds, Elias, he laughed. They just got hit with a freeze order on the excellence grant.
They're claiming you've sabotaged the education of hundreds of children by filing a frivolous report. It's only frivolous if the data is wrong, I said. Is the data wrong?
The data is a goddamn masterpiece, Marcus said. The OIG has already assigned a forensic auditor. But be ready, Sterling isn't going to take this quietly. You've just cut off her oxygen supply.
I know, I said, looking at Leo. He was staring at the ceiling, his eyes vacant. She's going to move from teacher to victim. She's going to try to make this about my mental state.
Let her, Marcus said in a courtroom. Mental state is hearsay. A freeze order is a fact. I hung up. I knew what was coming. Newton's third law.
Sterling was about to strike back, and she wouldn't use data. She would use the only thing she had left, her influence over the alphas and her reputation as a martyr for academic standards. Chapter 8. The Counterattack. Victoria Sterling did not become the Queen of Westwood by accident. She understood the social front better than any auditor. While I was focused on the spreadsheets, she was activating her most loyal assets, the alphas and their wealthy, influential parents. On Friday morning, I woke up to a temporary restraining order, TRO, served at my front door. The affidavit, signed by Victoria Sterling and co-signed by 3 concerned parents, was a work of fiction. It claimed that I had stalked Sterling at her home, threatened her with physical violence during our conference, and was unstable and delusional due to the trauma of my brother's unrelated mental health crisis. The board didn't stop there. A community safety bulletin was emailed to every parent in the district. It didn't name me, but it spoke of a hostile individual targeting Westwood's educators and jeopardizing the collegiate futures of the AP biology class.
The hubris was now being weaponized into slander. They're painting you as a school shooter in the making, Elias, Marcus said over a secure line. The TRO means you can't go within 500 feet of Sterling or the school grounds. If you so much as send an email to a teacher, they'll have you arrested for harassment.
Expected, I said. I was sitting in my car, parked outside a coffee shop 2 miles from the school. She's trying to isolate me. She wants to make me dynamic so she can stay static.
It's working, Marcus warned. The parents of the other kids, the ones you were trying to recruit, are getting scared. They're receiving reminders from the school that their children's college recommendations are contingent on a stable classroom environment. Sterling is telling them that if you win, their kids lose their Ivy League spots.
This was the multi-vector attack. She was hitting my social front, my reputation, and my asset acquisition, my allies. Then, the second blow landed. I received a call from Leo's best friend, a boy named Toby who was one of the few Omegas left in the class. He was whispering, sounding terrified.
Elias, you have to stop, Toby sobbed. Mrs. Sterling. She made us all stand up today. She told the class that Leo was a traitor who was trying to take away our grants. She said that anyone who talks to Leo or you is infecting the class. The alphas. They cornered me in the locker room. They said if I don't give them Leo's survival journal, they're going to tell the principal I was the one who supplied the pills to Leo.
My grip tightened on the steering wheel, but my face remained a mask of gray rock stone. Toby, did you record that? I asked.
No, I'm too scared. They took my phone, Toby said.
Listen to me, I said, my voice low and steady. Do not fight back. Do not argue. If they ask about the journal, tell them I have it and I've already sent it to the police. Stay gray. Do you understand? She's destroying him, Elias, Toby whispered. She's erasing him from the school. I hung up. Sterling wasn't just defending herself. She was executing a social death on my brother while he was still in a hospital bed. She was using the alphas to perform a proxy battery. I opened my laptop. I had a choice. I could fight the TRO in court, a process that would take weeks, or I could use the one variable she hadn't accounted for. Sterling believed her reputation was her shield. She didn't realize that in the digital age, a reputation is just a collection of unverified data. I began a digital trace of the Community Safety Bulletin. I didn't care about the content. I cared about the metadata. The bulletin had been sent at 8:15 a.m. from the school's administrative server. But the author tag in the PDF properties didn't say Superintendent Miller. It said VS Elite Consulting. She hadn't even used the school's template. She had written the safety bulletin herself on her private business laptop and sent it to the board to distribute. She had just used a taxpayer-funded communication system to distribute a document she authored under her private LLC to attack a private citizen who was a whistleblower. In the U.S., this is a violation of the Hatch Act if federal funds are involved, and a massive civil rights violation under Section 1983. You want a war of reputation, Victoria. I whispered to the empty car. Let's talk about identity theft. Chapter 9, The Major Setback. By Monday, the corruption ecosystem had fully engaged its immune response. I was sitting in Marcus Vane's office when the news broke. The school board had held an emergency closed session on Sunday night. They didn't invite the public. They didn't invite the media. The result: the board had independently audited Mrs. Sterling's classroom and found zero evidence of misconduct.
Furthermore, they had moved to indemnify her against any personal legal costs. They were using taxpayer money to pay for her defense. They're doubling down, Marcus said, throwing a legal brief onto his mahogany desk. And here's the kicker: the OIG has paused their inquiry. The superintendent convinced the state that your complaint was retaliatory and based on stolen, unverified logs from a terminated, disgruntled employee, Sarah Jenkins.
This was the major setback. My professional front had been neutralized by the very board I was trying to audit. They've discredited Sarah, I noted, my voice devoid of emotion. And since I'm under a TRO, I can't even approach the parents who were going to sign the affidavits. If I talk to them, I go to jail.
It gets worse, Marcus added. The board has filed a no trespass order against you for the entire district. You can't even attend Leo's IEP, Individualized Education Program, meetings.
They're effectively cutting you out of his legal rights as a student. I looked out the window. The school board was playing hardball. They weren't just protecting the grant, they were protecting their own seats. If the grant fraud was proven, the board members would be held personally liable for the disgorgement of the funds. They were fighting for their bank accounts now. I'm losing the social front, I admitted. The community thinks I'm a lunatic who's trying to bankrupt the school and ruin their kids' chances at Harvard.
You are, Marcus said bluntly. In their eyes, Sterling is the hero of the high achievers. You're the weak link trying to break the chain. How do you want to play this, Elias? We could appeal the TRO, but it'll take months.
No, I said, months is what they want. They want T patients to work against me. They want me to run out of money or for Leo to give up. I stood up and smoothed my suit. The gray rock was now a black box. I'm going to surrender, I said. Marcus blinked. Excuse me, he asked. I'm going to give them exactly what they want, I said. A broken man who realized he's beaten. I'm going to withdraw Leo from the district. I'm going to apologize for the misunderstanding.
Elias, if you do that, we lose all standing for the lawsuit, Marcus warned.
We lose the civil standing, I corrected him. But we're not playing for a settlement anymore. We're playing for the nuclear option. Victoria Sterling has a fatal flaw. She believes she is the smartest person in any room. When a narcissist wins, they get sloppy. They want to clean the house of any remaining evidence. I walked over to Marcus's computer. I need you to draft a withdrawal and release form. I'll sign it. I'll admit I was overwhelmed by grief and that my accusations were unfounded. I'll even offer to pay for the board's legal fees in exchange for them dropping the TRO. You're giving her a total victory, Marcus whispered. No, I said, I'm giving her a false victory. I'm giving her the confidence to delete the efficiency score logs and the VS Elite billing records that she thinks I haven't seen yet. And I'm going to leave her a very specific thank you gift. I pulled a USB drive from my pocket. I've created a mirror file of Leo's survival journal. It looks like the original, but it contains a tracking pixel and a scripted payload. When she opens it on a school computer to verify that the evidence is gone, She's going to invite me into the school's internal server. Chapter 10. The Bait. The surrender was executed with the precision of a funeral. On Tuesday morning, Marcus Vane delivered the signed withdrawal and release to the school board. I stayed in my car, looking like a man who hadn't slept in a week, a detail I achieved by simply not wearing a tie and letting a slight stubble grow. The board accepted the surrender within the hour. The TRO was lifted. The safety bulletin was retracted with a smug, "We are glad Mr. Thorne has seen reason during this difficult time," follow-up. Victoria Sterling, however, couldn't help herself. She wanted to see the prey crawl. She sent me an email from her private VS Elite account.
Mr. Thorne, I accept your apology. It is a shame it took a near catastrophe for you to realize that not everyone is meant for the high-altitude air of Westwood. The email read, I hope Leo finds a school more suited to his. Pace. Please bring his personal belongings, including his journals, to the front office by 4:00 p.m. today, so we can finalize the purge of his files.
The hubris is peaking, I muttered, reading the screen. I arrived at the school at 3:55 p.m. I carried a small cardboard box. Inside were Leo's textbooks and a leather-bound notebook that looked identical to his survival journal. Sterling was waiting in the lobby. She didn't have to be there, but she wanted the trophy of seeing me handed over the evidence. She looked radiant, her eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a total systemic victory. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy, "you look tired." "I just want this over with," I said, my voice cracking slightly. I handed her the notebook. "This is everything. The journal, his notes. I haven't made any copies. I just want Leo to be able to sleep without fearing this class." She took the notebook, her fingers brushing the leather with a possessive greed. She didn't even wait for me to leave. She sat down at the reception desk, opened the notebook, and flipped through the pages.
She saw the entry 42 I had painstakingly recreated. She saw the sterling 5 names. "Good," she whispered. "It's better this way, Elias, for everyone."
I walked out of the school. I didn't look back. I got into my car and opened my laptop. I had zeroed my emotions, but my technical index was at 100%. On the screen, a red dot appeared. Connection established. IP 1042.115, Westwood High Faculty Network. The journal I gave her had a Raspberry Pi Zero hidden inside the thick leather spine, powered by a flat lithium battery. It wasn't just a book, it was a Wi-Fi pineapple. The moment she opened it within the school's trusted network, it began a man-in-the-middle attack on her specific workstation. But I didn't even need that much complexity. Sterling, in her arrogance, did exactly what I predicted. She went straight to her computer to verify and delete. On my screen, a window popped up. Action detected. Accessing directory C/users/v sterling/desktop/vs elite records. Action detected. File deletion billing 2023, XLSX. Student efficiency logs final, PDF. She was cleaning the house. But because she was opening these files to ensure they were the right ones to delete, the tracking pixel was firing every 10 seconds, sending a mirrored copy of the data straight to my secure cloud server. She thought she was erasing the evidence. In reality, she was authenticating it for me. By deleting them, she was proving consciousness of guilt. In the U.S. legal system, spoliation of evidence is an admission that the evidence would have been unfavorable to you. "Keep going, Victoria," I whispered, watching the progress bar. "Delete the academic decathlon transfer logs. Delete the emails to the principal about the student purge." The data poured in. 1,200 emails ghostwriting the board's safety alerts. A ledger showing $95,000 transferred from VS Elite into a personal account in the Cayman Islands. A kill list for the 2024 semester. Students she had already marked for counseling out based on their parents' inability to pay the mentoring fee. She wasn't just a bully, she was a racketeer. I closed the laptop. The false victory was complete. The board thought the war was over. Sterling thought the evidence was ashes. They were now in the most dangerous position possible. They were unguarded. Chapter 11. The Sterling Snare. The beauty of a narcissist is their predictability. When they win, they don't just celebrate, they cleanse. To Victoria Sterling, the leather-bound journal I had surrendered was more than just a notebook. It was a trophy of my submission and a repository of her risk. She couldn't wait to see it burn, but first, she had to ensure it was the only copy. Sitting in my car in the dark corner of a library parking lot, I watched my laptop screen as the red telemetry light flickered. Sterling was back in her classroom, long after the final bell. The school's internal Wi-Fi, usually a fortress of basic encryption, had welcomed the journal inside its gates. On my screen, a window mirrored her desktop. I watched her cursor move with a predatory grace. She opened a folder titled Curriculum Oversight, a boring name for a lethal archive. Inside were the efficiency score logs I had suspected. These weren't just grades. They were probability analysis sheets. She was literally calculating which students had the highest statistical probability of scoring a 5 on the AP exam, and which ones were dead weight, that would drag her average below the grant threshold. Then she did exactly what my cold justice strategy required. She opened the files one last time to gloat, then dragged them toward the recycle bin. Action log, C/users/v sterling/desktop/efficiency 2023 final, PDF deleted. Action log, C/users/v sterling/desktop/counseling outlist 2024, docx deleted. In the world of law, this is called spoliation of evidence. By deleting these files after being served with a notice of a preliminary inquiry, she was committing a felony. But she didn't know I was watching. She didn't know that every time she clicked Open to verify a file before killing it, my script was capturing the metadata and the raw content. The most damning discovery appeared at 7:14 p.m. She opened a file titled Next Phase. It was a list of 14 names, students currently in the 10th grade, prospective AP biology candidates for the next year. Next to 6 of the names was a red X and a note: financial standing, insufficient, recommend early academic redirection. She was already pre-sorting the next year's prey based on their parents' ability to pay the VS Elite consulting fees. She wasn't just a bully, she was a gatekeeper for a class-based hierarchy. "You're not just erasing the past, Victoria," I whispered, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. "You're documenting your future intent." I hit the compile button. The data was now mirrored across 3 separate offshore servers. The journal in her hands was now irrelevant. The ghosts of the Sterling 5 were no longer just stories in a counselor's box. They were now backed by the digital breadcrumbs of a woman who thought she was smarter than the machine. I watched her log off. She stood up. I could see the shadow of her movement through the remote webcam access, and she looked satisfied. She took the leather journal, walked to the lab sink, and I watched through the grainy lens as she set it on fire in a glass beaker. She watched the flames with the rapt attention of a priestess at an altar. She thought she was burning the only bridge that led back to her crimes. She didn't realize the bridge was already made of steel, and I was the one holding the remote detonator. Chapter 12. The Forensic Accounting. By Friday morning, my surrender was 48 hours old. The board was complacent. Sterling was triumphant. And Alina, my forensic accountant, was finally holding the financial front in her hands. We met in a windowless office in the city, surrounded by the hum of high-end servers. Alina didn't do emotions. She did cash flow diagrams.
Elias, your teacher isn't just a narcissist. She's a brilliant money launderer, Alina said, sliding a tablet toward me. Look at the academic decathlon fund. It's a 500 one. See? 3 nonprofit entity managed by the school, but Sterling has sole signatory authority for operational expenses.
I looked at the ledger. In the last 3 years, the fund had received over $150,000 in anonymous donations. Those aren't donations, I noted. Those are the kickbacks from VS Elite Consulting.
Exactly, Alina said. The parents pay the $5,000 mentoring fee to her LLC. She keeps $3,000. She donates $2,000 back to the decathlon fund. The decathlon fund then hires third-party vendors for educational materials and competition travel. I tracked those vendors. They're shell companies owned by the brother-in-law of Superintendent Miller. The rotten root was no longer a metaphor. It was a district-wide kickback scheme.
The board wasn't protecting Sterling because of her test scores. They were protecting her because she was the engine for a money laundering loop that funneled parent, consulting fees back into the pockets of the administration. Every time a student was counseled out for not paying, it wasn't just a loss for the student. It was a loss for the superintendent's private account. This is the V material we needed, I said. This moves it from a school board dispute to a RICO case. It gets better, Alina added. I found the Cayman account.
She was sloppy. She used the same password for her VS Elite login that she used for her school email, the one your journal captured. She has $420,000 sitting in a Grand Cayman branch. Half of that was deposited within 48 hours of the state excellence grant being dispersed each year.
Disgorgement, I whispered. In the U.S., disgorgement is the legally mandated repayment of ill-gotten gains. Not only would Sterling go to prison, but the state would be authorized to seize every penny she had ever made from the school, including her pension. I looked at the total, $420,000. It was a high price for the lives of 5 children. Alina, I need a certified report. I want the nexus between the VS Elite payments and the Miller Shell Companies clearly mapped. I want it ready for a grand jury. You're not going back to the board, she asked. The board is the target now, I said. You don't ask the fox to investigate the hen house. You call the hunters. I left the office and called Marcus Vane. Marcus, we're bypassing the board. We're bypassing the OIG. I have the paper trail for a multi-year embezzlement and wire fraud conspiracy. I need you to set up a meeting with the district attorney and the FBI's white-collar crime unit. We're going to file a qui tam lawsuit.
A qui tam, Marcus sounded impressed. You're suing on behalf of the government to recover the defrauded grant money. Yes, I said.
And as the whistleblower, I'm going to ensure the reward portion of that recovery goes into a trust fund for the families of the Sterling 5. We're going to use the board's own stolen money to pay for their children's legacy.
Elias, Marcus said, his voice dropping. When they see this, they're going to realize your surrender was a tactical feint. They're going to panic. They're going to try to destroy the physical servers at the school. Let them try, I said. I already have the mirror. Now I just need the handcuffs.
Chapter 13. The Subpoena Storm. On Monday morning, while Victoria Sterling was likely preparing a lecture on the biological superiority of resilience, Marcus Vane was in a federal courthouse in the city. The withdrawal and release I had signed was now a dead letter. Under the fraud in the inducement doctrine, a contract signed under the premise of a lie, or in this case, a forged digital signature by the school, is null and void. The board thought they had a shield. They had actually handed me a sword. By 11:00 a.m., the subpoenas began to land. They didn't arrive via email. They were delivered by process servers in dark suits who walked into the school's front office and handed envelopes to the principal, the superintendent, and every member of the school board. The subpoenas were for everything Every email, every text, every financial record of the academic decathlon fund, and every internal communication regarding the Sterling Five. I sat in a coffee shop across from the school, my laptop open. I wasn't accessing the school's network anymore. I was watching the public conflict manifest. Through the window, I saw the principal run to his car. 10 minutes later, Superintendent Miller's black SUV screeched into the parking lot. They were in a narcissistic panic. They thought the war was over. They thought I was a broken man.
Now the federal government was knocking on their door, demanding the books they had cooked for a decade. Marcus called me. The board president just tried to call me to negotiate. I told him I don't negotiate with subjects of a federal investigation.
He started crying, Elias. He claimed he didn't know the tutoring money was coming from a protection racket. He's already trying to flip on Sterling. Let him flip, I said, but he's still on the hook for the forgery. Did you serve Sterling?
Not yet, Marcus said. I wanted to wait until the board was already in the middle of their meltdown. I want her to see her shield dissolve before the process server reaches her classroom. I want her to feel the social exclusion before the legal one.
Do it now, I said. She's in third period AP Biology, the Darwinian lecture. I watched as a man in a nondescript suit walked toward the school's main entrance. This was the information asymmetry in full effect. Sterling still thought she was in control. She thought she was the predator. She didn't know that the board had already turned on her. She didn't know that the OIG had unpaused their inquiry and upgraded it to a criminal referral. On my screen, the school's internal, staff-only, Slack channel, which I still had a backdoor into through the mirrored server, was a chaotic mess of messages. Admin principal, do not open the envelopes. Call the district lawyer now. Superintendent Miller, the OIG is at the front gate. They have a warrant for the servers. Who leaked the decathlon ledger? I sipped my coffee. The Greyrock was now a mountain, and the avalanche had begun. The Sterling Five families were already at the district attorney's office, giving their sworn testimony. The kill list I had captured from Sterling's computer was the final piece of binding evidence. It proved that her actions weren't just a teaching style. They were a business plan that required the elimination of the weak to protect the profit of the strong. Survival of the fittest, Victoria, I whispered. But you forgot that in the modern world, the fittest isn't the one with the most ego. It's the one with the most backups. Chapter 14, The Classroom Raid. Victoria Sterling was standing at her podium, her voice resonant as she discussed the genetic imperative of dominance. The alphas were in the front row, pens poised. The omegas, the few who remained, were in the back, shadows of themselves hoping to go unnoticed. The door didn't just open, it was occupied. 4 individuals entered. 2 were state troopers in crisp uniforms. 1 was a man in a suit holding a folder. The last was a woman from the state auditor's office. The classroom went silent. It was a dynamic shift so profound that the air seemed to thin.
Mrs. Victoria Sterling, the man in the suit asked. Sterling didn't lose her composure immediately. She tightened her grip on the podium, her knuckles white. I am in the middle of a lecture. You are trespassing in a secure academic environment.
We are here to execute a search and seizure warrant for all digital and physical records related to VS Elite Consulting and the Westwood Academic Decathlon Fund, the man said. His voice was as cold and forensic as my own, and we are here to serve you with an indictment for wire fraud, grand embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. The alphas stared.
The god of their ecosystem was being spoken to like a common thief. This is a mistake, Sterling said, her voice finally cracking, the hubris shattering into jagged shards. I have a contract. I have the support of the board.
The board has been served with similar indictments, the state trooper said, stepping forward. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. The Omegas in the back of the room did something they hadn't done in years. They stood up, they didn't cheer, they didn't scream, they just watched. As the handcuffs clicked into place, the nuclear option finally reaching its conclusion, Sterling's eyes swept the room. She looked for an ally. She looked for an alpha to stand up for her, but the alphas were already looking away. Their loyalty was a product of her power. Now that the power was gone, they were already calculating their own survival.
Mr. Thorne did this, she hissed as she was led toward the door. That pathetic, broken man, Mr. Thorne, isn't here, the auditor said. The data is here, Mrs. Sterling. And the data doesn't lie.
As they led her through the hallway, the school was a gauntlet of silence. Students stood by their lockers, phones out, recording the Queen being marched out in steel restraints. The social destruction was instantaneous. Within 10 minutes, the video would be on every social media platform in the county. I was standing by the front gate as they brought her out. I didn't say a word. I didn't gloat. I just held up my phone, the screen showing the entry 42 from Leo's journal. She saw me. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage, the narcissistic injury finally exposed. She tried to lung toward me, but the troopers held her firm. "Natural selection is a mercy, Victoria," I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet audible in the sudden hush of the parking lot. "It keeps the herd from suffering the weight of the weak. Today, the system decided you were the weak link." They shoved her into the back of the squad car. The door slammed with a finality that echoed across the campus. The V material was settled. The L binding was secure. The hubris had finally met the T patience of an auditor who knew how to wait. I turned and walked away. I had one more stop to make. Chapter 15. The Final Grade. 6 months later, the dust hadn't just settled, it had been paved over. Westwood High was under a state receivership. The entire school board had been forced to resign. Superintendent Miller was currently serving a 5-year sentence for his role in the decathlon shell game. The Excellence Grant had been revoked, and the district was forced to repay $1.2 million, a debt that would take a decade to clear. But the real focus was the trial of Victoria Sterling. She didn't get a plea deal. The district attorney, spurred on by the subpoena storm and the public outcry of the Sterling 5 families, went for the maximum. In the end, it wasn't the bullying that sank her. It was the wire fraud. The federal government doesn't care about a teacher's ego, but they care deeply about $250,000 in misappropriated grant funds. Sterling was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Her VS Elite assets were seized under civil forfeiture laws. Her pension was vacated. She was, in the most literal sense of her own philosophy, culled from the professional herd. I sat in the back of the courtroom as the judge delivered the sentence. Sterling looked small. Without the podium, without the lab coat, without the power to destroy a child's future with a red pen, she was just an aging woman in a cheap suit. She never looked at the families. She never apologized. To the very end, she believed she was a martyr for high standards. As I walked out of the courthouse, I found the parents of the Sterling 5 waiting on the steps.
Mr. Miller, the mechanic, shook my hand. He didn't say much, but for the first time in 5 years, he didn't look like he was carrying the weight of a ghost. "The trust fund for the scholarship is set up," I told them.
The Quitam reward money, the $200,000 whistleblower portion, is being transferred today. It will provide mental health support for every student in this district for the next 20 years. "Thank you, Elias," he said, "for not just being angry, for being effective." I drove back to the hospital, but I didn't go to the ICU. I went to the rehabilitation wing. Leo was sitting in a wheelchair in the garden. He was thinner, and his eyes still carried a flicker of the Darwinian shadow, but he was holding a book. It wasn't biology. It was a history of the labor movement, a book about people who fought for the rights of the many against the greed of the few. Did it happen? He asked as I sat down beside him. It's over, Leo. The final grade is in. She's not coming back. None of them are. He looked at the garden, at the flowers that were blooming without any efficiency scores to justify their existence. I thought I was the weak one, Elias. I thought I was the sediment. You weren't the sediment, Leo, I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. You were the data point that broke the machine. You were the one variable she couldn't account for, the fact that you weren't alone. I looked up at the sky. My gray rock index was finally beginning to lower. The audit was closed. The ledger was balanced. In the world of cold justice, there are no happy endings, only systemic resolutions. The lives lost could not be recovered. The trauma would leave scars, but the rotten root had been excavated and the soil was finally clear. I pulled my phone from my pocket and deleted the mirrored server access. I didn't need it anymore. Let's go home, Leo, I said. We have a lot of makeup work to do, but this time we're setting our own pace. Post-mortem analysis, the Darwinian diploma, a cold justice study in systemic warfare and professional deconstruction. This analysis summarizes the conflict between Elias Thorne and Victoria Sterling, extracting the core logic of the story. The three situational realities. 1. Institutional shielding, the rotten root. The system does not protect people, it protects revenue. Victoria Sterling was protected because she was a high-performing asset that secured the $250,000 state excellence grant. In any organization, the golden goose is often granted immunity for misconduct until that misconduct threatens the revenue itself. 2. The narcissistic blind spot. The antagonist operated on the Dunning-Kruger effect. She believed her status and tenure made her untouchable, and that her digital literacy was superior to those she oppressed. This hubris created a single point of failure, the belief that deleting a file is the same as erasing a crime. 3. The proxy weaponization. Toxic leaders rarely act alone. They use social engineering to turn peers against one another. Sterling's alpha versus omega classroom structure forced the high performers to become her enforcers. The three strategic reactions. 1. The Gray Rock Protocol. P achieved victory by maintaining an emotional index of 0%. By refusing to scream, beg, or argue, Elias denied the antagonist the narcissistic supply she needed to frame him as unstable. He became boring data, which allowed him to move unnoticed through the system. 2. The multi-vector offensive. Elias did not just report bullying. He attacked three fronts simultaneously: professional grant fraud, financial embezzlement, and social pattern of practice. 3. The false surrender baiting. The most lethal move was the false victory. By feigning defeat and signing the release forms, P triggered the antagonist's hubris multiplier. This caused her to lower her guard and commit spoliation of evidence. The three mindset shifts for growth. 1. The victory equation. Stop looking for emotional closure and start looking for binding evidence. In any conflict, your goal is to find the material violation that the system is legally obligated to punish. 2. Systems thinking versus personal drama. Do not view your enemy as a person. View them as a faulty process in a larger machine. Your job is not to punish them, but to feed their violations into the machine and let the machine do the crushing. 3. The power of T, strategic patience. Western justice is a game of compression. The longer you wait to collect data without reacting, the more energy you store for the final strike. The person with the best understanding of the regulations will always win the survival of the fittest. The ICU discovery. Elias finds the journal and identifies the Sterling 5 pattern. The confrontation. Elias uses gray rock tactics as Sterling admits to her Darwinian filtering. The corruption. The school board protects Sterling and Elias discovers digital forgery. The whistleblower. meeting the fired counselor and uncovering the predator-prey classroom dynamic. The audit begins, gathering the grieving families and finding the grant fraud smoking gun. The paper trail, discovering the VS Elite Protection Racket and shadow consulting fees. The first strike, bypassing local control to trigger an OIG federal grant freeze. The counterattack, Sterling weaponizes the community with a restraining order and slander. The false surrender, Elias feigns total defeat to bait Sterling into a fatal overreach. The Trojan horse, Sterling purges evidence, unaware her actions are being mirrored. The digital snare, capturing Sterling's future intent and spoliation of evidence. The money laundering, mapping the kickback loop to the superintendent's offshore accounts. The subpoena storm, federal authorities descend as the school board administration collapses. The nuclear option, federal agents raid the classroom mid-lecture for a public arrest. The final grade, sentencing, restitution, and a systemic victory for the families. Educational takeaway, analyzing systemic warfare, gray rocking, and the victory equation.